And welcome back, family, to another installment of Metaphysics on Your Mind. We are going through hidden meanings of the Bible. We're about to get into a bit more into meditation, just kind of heading into that juncture. On February the 5th of 1962, there was an event called the Aquarius Stellium. And basically what that was, or is the 7 visible planets in the sky, with the naked eye. The original 7 planets that the days of the week are named after. And as we get into the chakras, we'll discover them again. But this event, this Aquarius Stellium, all of these 7 visible planets, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, basically almost lined up. So if you can kind of look at this diagram here, every section of, we'll say it's the pie, the solar pie, or the astrological pie, the zodiac pie, we should say. Every section is 30 degrees, right? Because a circle is 360 degrees. So basically on this day, these 7 luminaries, planets, angels, whatever you want to call them, gods, were all within 17 degrees of each other, okay, in Aquarius. So in other words, if this is 30 degrees, you had all these planets basically lining up in what would be about a little bit over half. Okay, so that was a big event, and many people, well, there are a number of people that feel that the age of Aquarius that we've been speaking about was actually ushered in on this date. The date that these planets all lined up. As a matter of fact, if you watch that movie, Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, which came out, I think it was in 1968, there's an image in the film with all these planets basically lined up. And if you've seen that film, you know that it deals with a lot of things. But this Aquarius Stellium is, again, where some or many people feel was when we kind of came at least on the cusp being about 50 to 60 years before you kind of get deeper into the age, the 2,160 year age. So we already talked about in Aquarius that biblically it's referred to as the man with the pitcher of water. Well, that only makes sense because even though it's an air sign, right? Aqua, Aquarius, it's got water in the name. And the man with the pitcher of water is in the air pouring out a pitcher of water, right? Hence the name, the water bearer. We'll get more into that. But basically, it's going to be a parallel to the story of Christ changing water to wine. Basically, the water isn't real water, of course. It is spirit. So the spirit of the age, okay, will be poured out, shall we say, over the earth, the Microcosm, right? And the effects, of course, from all the angles of light on our brains, on basically what that kind of means is shifting from Pisces to Aquarius would be, to use the analogy we used a few installments back, that if you imagined all of these different energies were different cities, the different vibration or energy that a city has, it's kind of like if we think of Pisces as water, if you took, say a city that's near water, let's just say Seattle, right? Northwest coast, it's like going from the energy of Seattle, and where's Aquarius? Aquarius is in the air, right? So we think of height. It's like going from the energy of Seattle to the energy of Denver, the higher elevation, right? So that's one way to look at this transition of energy, okay? And again, in Revelation, the so-called apocalypse is not the end of the world. I mean, again, there's been a lot of erroneous information passed on to people that Revelations is speaking about the end of the world in total. It's speaking symbolically about the end of an era or an age, and then things are going to take a turn or a change. But unless we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves and just assume, because this is next in the cycle, that it's got to be better than the previous cycle, the one we've just come out of, Pisces. Not necessarily true, even though that these are roughly 2,000 years each, and there's a change in the expression of the energy as it moves through this cycle, the precession of the equinoxes. It doesn't necessarily mean that society gets better. It just means that the energy changes, and it depends on how we channel that energy. That change will determine what manifests in the Microcosm, the earth itself. Because remember that the idea is things are happening here, energies are interacting with us, with the brain, with the nervous system, in all living things on the earth. And then what happens is, however that energy is processed in the brain, okay, in the mind, then we turn around 7.7, 7.8, whatever billion people, and then we then reflect out on the Microcosm with the way that we, our societies, our cities, our schools, our, judicial systems, political systems, religious systems, all of that gets reflected from us, and then we create the society, basically out of the collective consciousness of the aggregation of all human consciousness. And let's just keep it real. As we look around the society that we have today, we could clearly use a change, but the only way that we know, well, we don't know, the trick is this transition, which is supposed to be a raising of the vibration, raising of consciousness. What happens to a person whose consciousness is not in alignment, does not vibrate in a match with the new vibration, the new consciousness? In other words, if you're still vibrating, if your consciousness is that of Pisces, and you're not able to make the transition to the new energy without great difficulty, that's part and parcel of what this book is about, okay? Because again, everything is energy. So this possibly was the beginning of the age, because we know what happened in the 60s. 60s was wild. I mean, you had the anti-war movement, civil rights movement, assassinations. You had everything going on in the 60s, and it was actually all over the world. It wasn't just say in the US. So there was clearly a big change, that happened in in the 60s that kind of marked a new threshold of what society was all about. And ever since, you've seen permutations, but basically Aquarius ruling technology. Okay, we know we've been in the age of technology roughly from about that time, from the 50s and 60s. That's pretty much what this age has been about. Computers, now we're getting into all kinds of stuff, artificial intelligence or whatever. So the point is, the energy, we're just going to say for conversation purposes right now. So we're saying these two forces make up basically everything in the visible universe. Electromagnetism, electricity and magnetism. As far as the symbolism in the Bible is concerned, the symbol, or the premier symbol, is the sun. Okay? Because the sun is electric, right? And obviously we live in an electric universe, but the sun is electric. We think of the moon as being magnetic, right? Influencing the tides, emotions. So if we talked about how women had a very prominent role in the mystical systems up until just prior to the age of Aries, the age of war, and women weren't quite as important to the warlike societies of that era. You're going to see a lot of references to El. Obviously, we talked about the Elohim, and all the other words that begin with El, the angels, and so on and so forth. And same with the zodiac, right? The only clear references to a woman is Virgo, right? And then the same thing with much of the Bible. Jesus, we're going to just jump around a little bit here. We're not going to go too deep in it, but it's called the sun, right? The sun, S-O-N. Okay. We're going to go further in this, and we'll show that these two are basically interchangeable for the purposes of discussing the symbolism in the Bible. S-U-N, S-O-N. Okay. So the sun represents symbolically this concept of the Christ, the Son of God. Son of God, Son of God. Magnetism, or the magnetic, which is receptive, right? This projects, this receives, or is receptive. You'll know this person in the Gospels. Because everything's hidden. Mary Magdalene. Magnetic. So in that story, Mary Magdalene is representing magnetism, the magnetic, okay? And Jesus Christ, and he's not the only one, is represented by the sun. So we have the electric and the magnetic. But again, women were short shrift in much of these, this particular time when these writings were developed. So Mary Magdalene gets to be the Virgin Mary when a man and a woman, get married, right? That's obviously where their married comes from. Mary, we know maritime, marine. So that's where the goddess is hidden. Okay? marine, and so on. So again, we're talking about forces and powers in the universe. And those forces and powers are portrayed as, positive and negative. The idea is we understand that both are needed, the positive and negative. Negative doesn't necessarily mean something that's bad. It just means that positive you're adding, and with negative you could say taking away or receiving. But they're both absolutely, for lack of a better word, they're husband and wife, at least in the duality that we operate in. All as one at the end of the day, but from our vantage point, everything is created through electromagnetism, and there's also another element to it which we'll go into, which is the element of sound. But we won't go into that in this particular installation. The point here is to, as we're about to go more into biblical scripture about what we talked about in the last installment, which was, I think it was where Christ was talking about entering in. We said, what is this idea of entering in? And we had this axis here that, we said that the east was the spirit, the west was the intellect, the south was the physical, the north was the emotions. Okay? So let's jump into, because we want to find out what is Christ referring to with this entering in. He said, you take away the key of knowledge, speaking to the religious leaders of the day. Woe unto you, lords, you take away the key of knowledge and not entering in yourselves, and those who wanted to enter in, you hindered. So let's see if we can get a little bit more understanding of what is being referred to with this entering in. And remember, we don't, before we do that, let's go to 2 Corinthians 3:6, because I know a lot of people say, you were brought up in a religion or the church or whatever that, shall we say, conveyed that this is all literal, meaning, what we're reading in here is a literal, quote unquote, word of God. Let's see what the Apostle Paul says about being literal. So let's go to 2 Corinthians 3:6, I believe. Yeah, so let's go to that, because we want to make sure that we're consistent with what the book itself says. So if we go to 2 Corinthians 3:6, this is the Apostle Paul, who also, he's talking about God, who also hath made us able ministers of the New Testament, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life. That's the Apostle Paul. So basically what Paul is saying, and we're going to get into examples of what Paul is speaking about. So he's saying, be a minister not of the letter, but of the Spirit. Translation, don't read this literally. Read it spiritually. Read it mystically, because if you read it literally, there's going to be problems. Okay? That's basically what Paul is saying, is that you have to understand that all of this is of a spiritual nature, not of a literal physical nature. And that's what has happened over time, is our societies are taking these ancient writings literally and trying to duplicate something that was never meant to be a physical thing, because it's a spiritual. Remember we said the East, the right hemisphere of the brain, is spirit. Okay? And the rest of this stuff is going to go by the wayside. It's all temporary. The physical body, intellectual, emotional natures, when the spirit leaves the body at death, these are gone. This lives on, and we'll get more into that, but this is connected to God. So when they're speaking about entering in and not taking things literally, Paul is saying, hey, the only way we can communicate these concepts to you is with symbols that you understand. You know what water is, you know what fire is, you know what the orbs in the sky are, you know what these things are. We'll take an existing city or settlement or town and utilize that in the story because you're familiar with that, right? How else are you going to communicate this mystic writing that has many levels of meaning, speaking basically about consciousness, to people that are not, I don't want to use the word sophisticated, but that have not been, in the ancient times, it would have been initiated, right, into this esoteric knowledge. So it's done through symbols. It's done through metaphor, allegory, parable. Basically, the best way, as I said before, to look at it is that this book and all other mystic books everything is an as if. It's as if Noah got every animal on the earth into a boat. Okay? We know that's not really possible from one location and one, but when you understand it, as Paul said, spiritually, you understand that what was brought on the boat was the animal nature of man. Okay? The beastly nature, that which was created on the sixth day. The second man, not the first, not the light man, not the spirit man, not the soul, but the physical. And we're going to go into Noah. But again, you have to read these, understanding that the only way you can even remotely discuss the infinite is with as ifs, symbols. It's as if. Because whether you're talking about this book or any other book, you cannot encapsulate the all, the infinite one, what inside of a binder or a box. Okay? All you can do is you can make a projection, and as if, of the forces of nature, of God, of consciousness, of light. But you cannot encapsulate the all in any one book. You can take all the books that's ever been written and stack them up and multiply them by 1,000, and you're not going to contain the infinite one. So any idea that you can, if it was even possible, for you to imbibe the true or full nature of the Most High, of the Creator, of the highest consciousness. Come on, it's an as if. You could say it's inspired, okay, but it's still an as if. Everything is spoken about in symbols, okay? So when we come back to the next installation, we'll move a little further. But I think that's the idea, is time is of the essence, okay? That's why I mentioned the stellium and the age of Aquarius, because, you know, whether you believe in astrology or not, I think everyone that has any kind of sense about them understands that there's a great transition going on around the world and in society. Not necessarily for the better, or not necessarily for, you know, the worst, but there's a change, right? The trick is, as co-creators, we can have an effect on the expression of that change. But it's only if we're all conscious. It's only if there's a critical mass, because it won't be the majority in most cases. But there has to be a critical mass of consciousness to understand what we're dealing with, what this is all about. So, like I said, we'll pick it up and we'll move a little further along. But again, the idea is that everything is done in symbols and parables, because that's really the only way that you can do this, as if. So we're learning the different, you know, nuances that we have to navigate, right? We have to use these tools. And again, it's not like there's any one meaning to any of this. There are multiple meanings. But all we need to do is to find a way where we have an understanding of the basic, or the essence of the fact that bicycle built for two, okay? Physical you, spiritual you, different destinies. And next installment, we're going to go in deeper into entering in, because that's basically going to be where we begin talking about meditation. And as we talk about that, we'll continue with, you know, the biblical stories, because it's all about that. It's, as you'll see, many of these stories, the code is that these events are happening, but they're happening in the mind, and specifically actually in the four gospels, much of that is actually happening in a state of meditation. And we'll get into that. It's cool. So that's it for this particular installment. And we'll come back to it in part 3 of Who Are You? And what are you doing here? Because, you know, that's what we're on now. What we're doing to find out who we are, because we need to know ourselves, right? Remember the maxim, know thyself. And we also remember the maxim, as above, so below. As within, so without. So learning about ourselves, we're in fact learning about God and the universe, because man is the little universe. It's the microcosm, okay? Macrocosm, microcosm interplay, and then a reflection on the mesocosm on the earth in the society that we create based upon our collective consciousness. So that's where we're going with this. Once again, thank you so much. I want to thank also all new viewers, subscribers, those who've kind of been hanging with us. We really appreciate it. I looked at some of the comments about, you know, maybe we don't go once a week. Maybe we go back to what we were doing before, which was roughly about twice a week. I'm thinking maybe it's like every 5 days we'll do something. Maybe that's kind of a good in the, you know, we'll see if that's a sweet spot. So once again, thank you very much, and we will see you at the next installment. Peace.